Good afternoon, everyone. This is Brian Robson, the Medical Director here at Healthcare Improvement Scotland. And welcome to this, the 7th in our exciting lineup of QI Connect WebEx sessions for 2017. As you know, QI Connect provides an opportunity for colleagues across health and social care and beyond to learn from international leaders in the field of improvement, innovation and integration. We've designed these sessions to be short, accessible and recorded to allow access at a time that suits you. I'm now going to pass you over to Jennifer, who will take you through the technology we're going to use in today's session. Good afternoon, Jennifer.
Thank you, Brian, and good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's session. So I'm just going to take you through a couple of quick housekeeping slides to get us started.
And just before we do that, Jennifer, thanks very much for reminding us that we were due to have Brené Brown join us for QI Connect last month. But unfortunately, Brené and her team are based in Houston, Texas, and were hit bad by a hurricane there last month. So our thoughts go to Brené and her team, and we've been in correspondence with them, and Brené's agreed to join us for the 2018 QI Connect lineup. So our thoughts with Brené and the team. Thanks, Jennifer.
Great, thank you, Brian. And back to those housekeeping slides. So just a quick couple of tips to get started then. If you could please use the chat function that you see on the right-hand side of the screen to communicate, and I'll talk you through this in just a moment. I should say that if you are having any technical difficulties, such as not being able to hear the presenter speak, or if you keep losing connection, then please message the events manager using the chat function or by pressing *0 on your telephone keypad. So we do want these sessions to be interactive, and if you'd like to get involved in the conversation, please do so. If you can click on the chat icon circled in red at the top right-hand side of your screen, and when type your message and just select all participants so that everyone can see from the drop-down menu, and then click send. So we do design these sessions to be a fun and interactive learning experience, and we're keen to find out where our network of QI connectors are joining us from today. If you could please select the annotation tool that you see circled there in red, it looks like a pen, just the top left-hand side of your screen, and then click on the arrow button, and then show us where you are joining from. Hi to David Grayson, joining us all the way from New Zealand. We're busy across the UK today.
Yeah, great to see connections with Colleen and Eunice and others and friends in Canada. And as Jennifer says, welcome David. It must be 4 a.m. down in Waitemata District Health Board down in New Zealand. Always great to have you with us live on the call. And great to see so many colleagues from across the UK and indeed from the US as well. So you're very, very welcome. Thanks, Jennifer, for that introduction. And if you just keep your fingers at the ready, folks, we're going to have our usual quiz just in a moment. Welcome, Debbie, also. Now, delighted to say that we've reached 627 organisations that now sign up for QI Connect. And it's a credit to our QI connectors out there spreading the word that we've reached that huge number, which is absolutely super. Now, remember, competition time. So again, you need your fingers on the buzzers here, and we'd like you to tell us or put your arrow on the flag of the latest country. We now have 53 countries joining QI Connect, and the latest country, the one I'd like you to identify the flag of, is Liberia. Who's flagging up on Liberia? Close, Peter, but no cigar. No, we're not quite getting Liberia just yet. Thanks for trying, Wendy. Thanks, Amir. Thanks, Kirsty. But still no cigar. I think we're going to cover all the flags. Oh, well done, Eunice. So well done, Eunice. That's absolutely super to have a fantastic winner, the program coordinator from Karna. Well done, Eunice, for getting there. That was the trickiest flag I think we've had, Jennifer.
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
welcome to our colleagues from Liberia, bringing the total to 53 countries with QI Connect. And Eunice will be getting your much sought after QI Connect mug winging its way out to you in Canada. Now, we always love being able to show off your wonderful logos. We started off with one page of logos of the organizations, and now we're sitting at 19 pages. Wonderful logos from all over the world, from 53 countries, from 627 organizations. And we also, of course, have amazing connections in with universities, and we'll come on to them just in a moment. But great to see all of your logos coming across the screen just now. And we're always delighted, of course, to highlight that the whole of NHS Scotland connects in with QI Connect, and this is where it all started some 4 years ago. So welcome to all our colleagues in NHS Scotland, and we're now sitting at an amazing 63 universities joining us now, and we're absolutely delighted to have such a tremendous interest from universities who use QI Connect live and recorded to share learning on integration and innovation across the world. I'm absolutely delighted that we've got 3 new universities joining us today. We have the University of Stellenbosch from South Africa and the National University of Health Sciences from Singapore, as well as our colleagues in Queen Mary's College in Basingstoke in England. So you're very, very welcome to QI Connect. And again, for this episode of QI Connect, we have another 17 new organizations, and you're all very welcome to QI Connect. And a big shout out to our friend Fiona Reid Associates, who's been working with Healthcare Improvement Scotland and others in the field of QI across the UK and beyond. But welcome to all of our friends and colleagues who have joined us today. And as Jennifer mentioned, we record all the sessions of QI Connect so they can be used time and time again. And our friends in Ko Awatea in New Zealand highlighted the importance of this to us when we started the program. And all of the resources, all of the recordings are easily available on the Healthcare Improvement Scotland website. And you're very, very welcome to use all of those resources time and time again. And again, a big shout out to our friends at the International Society for Quality in Healthcare, ISQA, and their fellowship program, which has been using QI Connect resources as part of the approved resources for the fellowship program for quite some time. And of course, our new partnership for 2017, absolutely delighted to be working with the Health Foundation and NHS Improvement on the Q initiative. And a special shout out to the group of Q improvers from Scotland who are linking in today as a group and as a community. You're very welcome to QI Connect. And this is a small but perfectly formed QI Connect team that you see before us. Alex is on holiday, so I hope Alex is enjoying her holiday, but I'm sure she'll be catching up on Twitter. Big shout out to Carmen, who's doing all the administration and certification, and Michelle, who's in the studio with us today, who'll be working on resources along with Jennifer and myself. And also a welcome today to Dr. Simon Edgar, who's the Director of Medical Education at NHS Lothian and an anaesthetist. And we'll come to Simon a bit later on. Simon's going to ask the first question of our QI Connect speaker today. But please remember to tweet as you learn, #HISQIConnect, and follow us at HISQIConnect. So with that introduction, it's up to me to do a brief introduction to our speaker today. Our QI Connect speaker today has one of the best titles ever seen on a name badge. As the Director of the Centre for Real World Learning and Professor of Learning at the University of Winchester, Professor Bill Lucas and his team have been studying teaching methods and learning methods that help learners thrive in the real world. His early career as a classroom teacher demonstrated his energy and enthusiasm for knowledge and learning. He was deliberately infectious in his teaching methods and stimulating his pupils to be interested in and excited by knowledge and the application of knowledge, building curiosity, care and perseverance in their learning. Over his career, his classroom has now expanded to cover the whole globe, and he has contributed to international learning networks all over the world as a keynote speaker, as an intellectual collaborator, as a strategist, and as an accomplished author. Bill is also working closely with the Health Foundation as they launch the Improvement Research Institute at Cambridge University, which aims to stimulate research and quality improvement across the United Kingdom and beyond. Bill continues to inspire across fields as diverse as education, health, social care, engineering, innovation and quality improvement. So he's a perfect fit for us here today at QI Connect. Good afternoon, Bill.
Good afternoon, Brian, and thank you for that very generous introduction.
Now, Bill, I've just passed you the ball. We're looking forward to your talk.
So, I have received the ball, and let's get started. You'll see from the slide at the front there that there are a couple of organisations' logos. One, Brian has already mentioned, the Health Foundation, and my friends and colleagues in Sweden, Vinvad, part of the Forte group. I want to talk to you today about the title, Getting the Improvement Habit, and why QI is not enough. This may seem a slightly perverse thing to choose when I'm part of a series of talks that have the word or the phrase or the letters QI in them. But hear me out whilst I advance an argument that goes something like this. One of the reasons that we use QI is because improvement is an abstract concept. It's too tricky, and so it helps when we're talking with colleagues in the field if we use the names of tools. Those tools are helpful, but they can also put some people off. You don't have to go far in the QI world to fall over a run chart or a bundle or a lean method or an SPC or complete the list as you choose. These tools are helpful, but not only can they put some people off, they sometimes don't actually work. And there is a danger that we can find ourselves in a world where using QI tools becomes synonymous with actually improving stuff. Now, the third and fourth areas of my argument go like this. Habit change, which is really what all improvement is about, is extremely complex. And we've somehow got it in our head that whether it's a tool we're using or whether it's something else we're doing in our work or indeed home life, we simply need to know some stuff and be skillful at some stuff. And I'm going to suggest to you that that's simply not true. Knowing stuff and being skillful is important, but it's not enough. We need to have habits. We need to find ourselves in situations where we routinely do one thing and not another thing. And the final legs of my argument are going to be that if we reframe the whole important enterprise we're all passionate about, namely the improvement of health, of social care, of life chances, of education, all the things that I'm imagining that all of you care about, then it may help if we reframe the nature of the activity. And that in turn may help all of us who are involved in education, whether it's the initial professional formation of doctors and nurses and allied healthcare professionals and pharmacists and the rest, or whether it's the ongoing learning that is so critical in all organisations. So that's the argument, but let me start by presenting to you the framework that I want to share. Here it is. It's something that emerged from work with colleagues across the world and supported by the Health Foundation. And in this diagram you can see the business of co-producing health and social care expressed as a series of 5 habits, each habit broken down into 3, if you like, sub-habits. The But that's a little dull, so let me invite you now to imagine somebody you work with, somebody you admire possibly, who's a really brilliant improver, whatever you understand by that expression. Just follow them now on an imaginary journey and put your clock, if you think of the circle as a clock, at about 10:30. So we're in the learning zone. And you've just finished doing something with them, and the minute you've finished, they're full of questions. In fact, whenever you're with them, they're full of questions. And just as you think you're moving towards a conclusion or an answer, they're after some new problem. They're reflecting that maybe, although they've made progress, they haven't yet got the answer. And of course, they're always reflecting, whether it's the formality of an after-event review or the constant question of how can we do this better. And as you move around this imaginary clock face, you realize that whenever you're with them, they're constantly seeing it as their job, not just to do stuff, but to help others to do stuff, to influence the way people around them behave and act and think. That requires them to be empathetic, to understand other people's feelings and perspectives, to be facilitative. I can't tell you to do stuff. Well, I can, but you may not do it. And because of the fact that it's tricky to persuade people, I'll need to be comfortable with conflict. As you move around to the next segment, to the resilience segment, you'll see that improvers, and just ask this question of yourself too, have to be natural-born optimists or at least learned optimists, because we're going to have to deal with stuff which doesn't always go right. We also need to be calculated risk takers. Nothing will be gained if we don't take risks, but we need to be calculated because we're dealing with people's lives and people's quality of life. There will often be contexts where there is no one answer, and working in a complex system like health and social care, we're going to need to be able to tolerate uncertainty. Down at the bottom in the green segment, we'll need to be full of ideas, to be generating ideas left, right and centre, but at the same time to be critical thinkers, because many of the ideas will need to hit the cutting room floor. And we'll be needing to be team players. If you think about the great human advances in the last decade or so, think of the Hadron Collider, which would never have been possible without enormous team playing, or think of the unravelling of the human DNA strands, never possible without a deal of collaborative activity, and in that case a certain amount of competitive activity. And finally, here on the systems thinking mauve or turquoise segment, this is critical. We need constantly to be making connections, to be making new connections and new meaning to synthesize, and of course to be accepting of change in a complex system in which one change in one part of the system can lead to changes in other parts of that system. So there's the frame, and now I want to go back and make a few arguments in the way that I suggested at the beginning of this. Many of you will be familiar with the work of Paul Batalden and Frank Davidoff over the years. Here's a cogent reminder to us of the importance of making change-making the core of our work as we look after others. It's for too often, I think, in many people's cases, change-making is a project, or change-making is that irksome thing that appears in the any other duties element of our job description. It's something that somebody is requiring us to do. Until that becomes normal, Paul and Frank argue, we really will not continuously be able to improve healthcare. As Brian said, it's my privilege to be working with Professor Mary Dixon-Woods and colleagues at the new Institute for Improvement Research based at Cambridge, but working in collaboration with many partners across the UK, and as Brian intimated, more widely as we find our feet. This paper, recently written by Mary and her colleague at Leicester Graham Martin, lays out some of the territory I want to cover, and some of the territory that will be being addressed by the Institute. It reminds us that something between 81 and 89% of all that we do in healthcare, in the NHS, in the UK, think about your own system, is reliable. That means that something like 11 to 19% of what we do is unreliable. She reminds us that so much of QI work is time limited, is served up as projects. She reminds us too, please don't take to the drink or feel unnecessarily anxious at this apparent critique of QI, that many QI interventions are not well described. Many of them don't describe the context, and many of them assume that the intervention will work in multiple contexts when it doesn't. Perhaps most powerfully of all, many of the QI methods that we currently use simply don't work. Some of the lean examples fall into that category. Sometimes they work, and sometimes they don't. And many of the implementation techniques that do work, let's take PDSA as a reliable, when reliably used as a good intervention, many of them are not reliably used. And in a recent paper by Julie Reed and colleagues at Imperial, published in the BMJ Quality and Safety, that many of you will know, there's a very nice description of the low adherence even to such a technique as PDSA. So all is not well in the QI world. It's not well because QI is done by many wonderful enthusiasts. It's done locally, and the Institute wants to work alongside all of those, I'm imagining, who may indeed be on this call, who want to extract the learning juice from the QI orange. So the Institute's vision is of a world in which it becomes the largest systematic producer of learning. It is, of course, learning that is the glue that keeps the improvement system on the road. I'm mixing my metaphors, forgive me. We've had oranges and glue and you name it. We'll have more before I've finished. It was John Berwick, wasn't it, who talked of the ethic of learning that we need if any system is to improve. And we need that not just when stuff goes wrong, but we need learning to be normal. We need change making to be normal. And that means we need habits. We need habits to be part of our discourse. Now, look away if you're not the person who wishes to look at a naked woman at a window. In fact, look more closely, because this rather well-known image that it purports to be a woman at the image, something at the window, something that my colleague and friend Guy Claxton and I write about in our book for the BBC on creativity, the Creative Thinking Plan. She's not a woman at all. She is a cat, and on top of the cat a shelf, and then a pot plant with fronds that look a little like hair, and then a curtain down the right-hand side, and that is a wine glass in the middle of the picture. And you see, there is no woman at the window. And some of you completely lost the plot, because there in the lovely sunshine, sunshine down here in Winchester where I am today for a rare moment, there are some undergarments swinging in the breeze. There is no woman at the window. Now you've seen that, I'm sure rationally you will accept that. And I can't hear you, but I'm imagining that you do. But actually, if I ask you the question, can you still see the woman at the window, most of you will say yes. Herein lies a major problem of our human perception and of our ability or lack of ability to change habits. Why is it so tricky, except maybe on audit day, to reliably, that's to say 100%, use the hand sanitizer when you're required to do so? Why is it so tricky? Well, think about this for a second. Is it that we don't know about infection control? That we don't know about the power of soap and the power of cleansing gel? I think not. Is it that we don't have the skill to use a conventional handle, a squeezy bottle, or one of those handles that comes out a long way so we can use our elbows? I think not. No, it's something more subtle. It's something about the cues we get from the environment, the cues we get from the culture, our own inner prompting that makes us not see a woman at the window, but see something else, and see something that triggers a response, which is the right response. And that's the kind of habits of improvers that we need. Now, another reason this is tricky is that we are deeply resistant to changing our mind. This is David Gleicher's formula. If you don't know it, let me introduce you to it. It's very simple, very algorithmic, very algebraic, and it goes like this. To overcome your resistance to change, or indeed anybody's, you need to have three things in place. One, you need to have your dissatisfaction, D for dissatisfaction. You need that to be surfaced. The reason I need you to wash your hands is because if you don't, we suffer from, and then you complete the sentence. Then we need the V, the vision thing. We need a clear expression of purpose in all that we do. And finally, we need a first practical step, F for first step. That's to say, in this case, in the example I've just been using, to use the hand sanitizer. Now, I'm using a simple but tricky example, but I could be using lots of other examples, and I'd love you to be thinking of them as we go through. So, why now? Why a focus on habits? Well, I think there's been considerable interest in the scientific underpinning of what we're doing. There has been, I'm delighted to say, an expansion of courses run by universities. When we looked at the British UCAS database, there were more than 30 postgraduate and master's level courses in this area. And there are many independents, and I'm sure many of you in universities are offering them right now. Here in the UK, the Medical Royal College is very interested in the implication for continuing professional development and for initial professional formation. The Q community, already mentioned by Brian Robson, here in the UK, led by the Health Foundation. There's a lack of buy-in from too many clinicians and too many professionals to some of the techniques used by QI. Forgive me, my global colleagues, for these acronyms, but academic health science networks, and I won't even try and tell you what clerks are, but they're a wonderful mixture of academic and practice. We were very delighted in Scotland to receive support from the Scottish Chief Medical Officer. I'll show you a slide on that in a second, and I'm excited at the moment to be working with colleagues in Sweden and Denmark and the States, just for example, in this different way of shining a light on the important challenge of improvement. And finally, I think there's a lack of compelling theory of change. Why are we doing this? Why is this important? And I'm going to offer you one right now. But before I do, just you might like to, if you haven't looked at the excellent report by the Chief Medical Officer in Scotland called Realistic Medicine, where you'll see she's very kindly advocating the use of our frame. So my theory of change goes something like this, that if we want sustainable change, if we want those things at the bottom of the slide, if we want the considerable value that patients will have if we embrace an ethic of learning, then we need clearly to articulate the kinds of habits which improvers need to have, as well as the knowledge and skills. We're quite good on knowledge and skills, less good on habits. Then we can more precisely specify the learning, and I'm going to introduce you to the idea of signature pedagogy later on. And then we can build the capability that the system needs. And that's where I want to take you. So, where did we get to? Where did this come from? Who else has thought about habits as a way of framing human endeavour? Well, an eminent psychologist, Lauren Resnick in the United States, has, I think, put her finger on this very cleverly, in describing one's intelligence as the sum of one's habits of mind. And I think one's QI intelligence is, in a sense, just that. It's certain habits of mind of the kind that I've been describing to you. Scientists have thought about this too. Here's a very interesting paper that Callaghan and colleagues developed to describe the different ways in which science itself can be framed not just as a series of areas of knowledge and skill, but also as a series of vital habits of mind. Those, by the way, will really seriously help us in thinking about the habits of mind that we need as improvers. I was just distracted for a second there, multitasking, as my computer was giving me an odd error message. Forgive me. In our own work, we've been looking at engineering. Brian mentioned this earlier on. Engineering is quite like healthcare in that it's multidisciplinary. And we developed a set of engineering habits of mind. Thinking Like an Engineer is the publication that you can find it in. And as we developed this, we found it a very powerful way of engaging with schools and colleges and universities in describing engineering, not in terms of maths and physics, which often puts off some girls, for example, but in terms of making things work and a set of habits of mind. And then it was possible to move from the engineering habits of mind to thinking with them about the kind of, oh, we just lost the screen there. I'm going to carry on talking, but I've just lost my screen here. And I'll just ask you to pause for a second. Not sure why we've lost that, but we have. So I'm going to hope that I can get that back up. If I can't, I'm going to have to hope that I can just carry on talking and ask my colleagues in Scotland to take control.
We can come in here, Bill, just while your computers have a habit of doing that sort of thing, that's for sure.
My computer is completely gone. I'm just inviting my colleague Carol to see if we can get the computer up. Whilst I do that, let me assume that you know where I am and that we'll seamlessly carry on and that you'll... yes, I'm back up. Can you see me now?
We're still at the slide with the habits of an improver.
Okay, I'm just re-engaging with computer. You can hear me all right?
Yeah, David Grayson's quipping from New Zealand, needs some machine learning.
Thank you very much, David. I think it must be 4:30 now in New Zealand. Good to have you on here. I'm trying one other thing to see if that gets me on. Specified file failed to run. Okay, I'm going to carry on in audio way, otherwise we'll waste everybody's time. So I'll just assume that you will just let me know when you've clicked on. So click on now, please, to the short version of the article, Getting the Improvement Habit. If you can't bear to read the whole pamphlet, then you can download this from BMJ Quality and Safety. And now click on to the next slide. Might a habits of mind perspective help us to do various things? I want to argue to you that the habits of mind framework enables us to think more precisely about what we want in terms of our desired outcomes. It particularly avoids us it avoids the danger of QI enthusiasts for simply filling the curriculum with more stuff. It provides, we're finding, a really good framework for formative conversations across different fields. It can be a real spur for debate and conversation when trying to understand how people do things. And it's all part of the argument I'm making that we make improvement normal. So click on now, please, to the next slide, the idea of signature pedagogies. The idea comes, click on, please, from a guy called Lee Shulman. And I'll come to that in one second, but before I do, let me just remind us the nature of the beast here. The challenge of converting knowledge and skill into habits of mind is a tricky one, and this slide has, I think, 3 elements to it. So if you click right through so that we can see the David Perkins reference, that would be fantastic. So it's a bit like Aristotle's idea of phronesis. What people do when they're improving stuff requires their thought, their knowledge, their skill, and their sensitivity, as David Perkins puts it, to occasion. This is the context in which we live. It might be human context, environmental context. It might be that it's different on the ward from in the community setting. It's different in the primary setting from the secondary setting, and so forth. And I think here, please click on to the next slide, it's absolutely clear that our current learning methods are not yet up to the job. And Greg Obrink and colleagues have a lovely paper here which reminds us how too often we're just not getting what we need from the teaching and learning we have. And I have a moment of joy when I think I might have taken control back. But let me just see. Can you give me control back and let me see if I can do that. We've just clicked onto a slide called Piaget, and I'm now the presenter. And I'm just going to click back to the slide I had. Great. So our learning methods, I'm sure anyone on this call will say to themselves, well, that's not us. That's old hat. But sadly, in 2011, when this particular group looked at the kind of ways in which QI is developed, too often this was the case. And I know from my understanding of many of you whose logos I recognize on this call, this would absolutely not be the way you would be doing it. Neither would you simply be throwing a life raft of a bit of psychology here and there, although psychology is not a bad thing. And Piaget, I particularly enjoy his definition of intelligence, not far from, I think, a definition of improvement. His definition was reportedly knowing what to do when you don't know what to do. Pretty close, I think, to much of what we do in the world out there. So here's the idea of signature pedagogy. It's something that Lee Shulman is particularly known for and has been increasingly applied in the professions. And I think it has something to offer us here in the science of learning about and for improving health and social care. What he's asking us is the DNA, if you like, of learning methods that work well. What are the thumbprints of really effective QI methods? And I think we're beginning to have a better idea here. And now I go back to the engineering analogy I was using earlier on. And in engineering, I think we might well have said that a core, powerful signature method would be the engineering design process. And when it comes to the engineering habits, it's possible to look at those and think of each of those 6 habits and think of a set of learning methods that would be likely to lead to the kinds of things that we'd be trying to get. So if you're trying to get engineers to visualize stuff, then you'll get to use modeling and mental rehearsal and infographics and storyboarding. If you're going to get, let's look at the improving section of that. If you're going to seek to encourage the engineering habit of improving, then planning and hypothesizing and analyzing and reflecting and developing what Carol Dweck calls a growth mindset will be helpful. Now, all of this reads across, I think, to the area that we know well, where I think we might say that the plan, do, study, act cycle is a core method, is, if you like, a core aligning signature method. And if we now ask ourselves, so what are the other methods that we might be talking about here, then I think they might include some of these areas. Sustained opportunity really to be part of a health and social care context. They might be coached assignments. They will almost always involve peer learning and that ability to reflect and learn from the situation. Back to my metaphor of squeezing the learning juice out of the situation. They will often involve mentoring. And they will almost always involve us in inquiry, in thinking how we can ask better questions, if we can find problems as well as solutions. And they'll leave us with some tricky issues like the balance between theory and practice and which knowledge and domain systems and skill areas to use most. So we're nearly there. I promised half an hour and I'm pretty close to delivering that. So my argument so far has been that QI is important and many of its methods are splendid and work well and some of them don't. Even the ones that do work well, we don't always use reliably. Sometimes QI can put colleagues off. Sometimes QI can inadvertently lead us to focus on knowledge and skill. So people can be so close to statistics in a statistical process control activity that they forget to notice other things. And sometimes the knowledge and the skill that we put stage center takes us away from the habits that we need. If we can better specify the habits, we can perhaps better specify the learning and the pedagogies that might lead us to acquire them. This slide may appear to have nothing to do with what I'm talking about, but I think it's central. Here is an expression of Don Berwick's ethic of learning. Many of us, myself included, travel on airplanes far too often, and at some stage we have a safety video which reminds us what we do in the air in the event of an accident when oxygen masks will fall down. And if you travel with a child, it can be a slightly stressful moment, as the video reminds us that we must put the oxygen mask on ourselves first before we attach it to our child or our young passenger. And that's strange, because we want probably to help others first, but it's absolutely illustrative of what we're talking about here. If the system is going to improve, then we have to improve the learning of the people in that system. We need systematically to harvest that learning and then to choose learning methods, pedagogy if you like, signature pedagogies, that make it more likely that people learn how to do what it is they need to learn how to do. So back to the model for the last few slides. So I want us now to consider whether we find this a helpful model. I hope we do. I'm certainly not for 1 second arguing that it replaces knowledge and skill. I'm arguing that it might be a useful adjunct, a useful complement to thinking about the knowledge and skill needed for improving health and social care. Here I now ask you graphically to reflect on your own practice. What do you already do that is really helpful in improving influencing skills, or developing creativity, or building in systems thinking to all those that you work with? And to ask and answer those questions and to continue that dialogue. A friend and colleague of mine, Peter Davey, and managers and others up in NHS Tayside, to use a Scottish example, have been developing thinking about this, and here are just some very simple but important ideas about how they're building this into some of the work of early stage doctors, and it might equally transfer to almost anyone else. Peter and I will be presenting this at the ISQA event next week in London, if you're by any chance going to be there. And I'm hoping that this talk might be the stimulus, and I'd love a dialogue with colleagues from across the world so where we can harvest good ideas being used by others elsewhere. Now, just before I close, I want to introduce you to Ruby. If you're a watcher of films in English, you may be familiar with the film Educating Rita, or the Willie Russell stage show. Rita gave us, and us is Guy Claxton and myself, the idea for a book about Rita's imaginary granddaughter. This is a book for parents. This is a book for all of us, whether we're parents or not. And it's a book that finally takes the argument that I'm advancing in health and social care back to school. Because we imagine what it would be like if, as well as learning great science and wonderful English and whatever language you speak, and important mathematics and interesting geography and compelling history, as well as all of that, we imagine schools where you go to school and you acquire confidence and curiosity and all those words beginning with the letter C. All those soft skills, those non-cognitive skills that are so vital if we're going to be able to learn or improve anything in life. That's me done. If you want to enter into dialogue, that's where I am. Thank you so much for listening. I'm going to pass the baton back to my friends in Scotland.
Thank you very much, Phil. That was absolutely tremendous, and the chat box has been really set alight, and we'll come to some of those questions. Thanks very much to everyone who's been chatting in. But let's first of all go to Simon Edgar, who's in the studio with us here. Simon, Bill's covered a lot of ground there. He's referred back to the model. He's given many case studies and examples. What sort of things were going through your mind?
Yeah, Bill, thank you very much for a really interesting run through both your model and your thinking. I suppose if I can just ask you one question to start off with, and I think you've already referenced possibly part of the answer. So as educators, as a healthcare educator, we are very conscious of the challenge of the theory to practice gap, especially in a complex work system like health and care. So could you give us a sense of which of the habits or sub-habits in your model you think suffer most from that problem, that gap problem? And importantly, what could we do to close that gap and accelerate learning and practical application of new knowledge and skills?
That's a great question, thank you. I think that I'd probably take you to the systems thinking habit. which many people would talk about as being important, but actually is quite tricky, and I think within that it's the accepting of change. We tend to talk about change as if we're going to inflict it on others, and I think that little graphic I offered you, David Gleicher's formula, reminds us that, of course, we can be resistors ourselves to change. So we need really to be able to, at the intellectual level, understand and articulate our dissatisfaction, and that will be partly hard science and partly soft intuition, but both are very important. Then we need to have a real sense of where we're going, that's the vision, and then we need to have practical first steps. So in a sense, that formula brings together the second part of your question, which is, so how do you put the kind of theory-practice gap into action? And in some of my work, I found myself in a college where they were teaching apprentice electricians, and we were framing this as the Ohm's law problem. You know, at what stage do you need an apprentice electrician to understand the physics of Ohm's law? You probably don't need to, you certainly don't need it if you were allowed to unwire a plug these days, but you certainly do understand the principle of current flow when you're setting up a new circuit board outside a new housing development. So part of the job, I think, of educators is to embed theory in practice when the theory is needed, and we operate on a rather kind of lazy just-in-case principle. We kind of fill our young doctors and young nurses and young allied health professionals and dentists and the like with theory because it kind of makes the courses look important, and frankly it's what got them validated. And I think that's part of the underlying system issue, by the way, in not accepting habits. In terms of putting it into practice, I think we need to make the learning that we're offering anybody undertaking professional formation and professional development ongoing. We need to make it a mixture of practice and theory. There is, as Kurt Lewin once remarked, nothing so practical as a good theory, but there's a severe case of overuse of theory, just as I was arguing to begin with, there can be an overuse of practice in QI tools. So simple things in practice, in teams, get used to always asking, not as the last thing you ask, you know, maybe as a starting off question, what have we learned since we last met? Or as part of the process, as you're walking around, what are we learning today? Maybe using the framework, some colleagues have been trying this out, as a team tool. So rather than thinking about habits as an individual set of attributes, thinking them about something that they need to be in place in a team. So maybe thinking about how, as a team, do we manage to combine both our ability to develop ideas, but also to critique each other's ideas without being unkind.
Thank you very much indeed, Bill. That's great.
Thanks, Simon. Thanks very much, Bill. Let's go to some of the questions from the chat box. And thanks again, David Grayson from New Zealand. David makes a comment around in terms of whether we actually were ever taught how to learn. Did we actually learn how to learn? But he goes on to ask whether or not there are more simple ways of learning. Angie Palin, who's from the Health Quality Council in Saskatchewan, she asks a question here, Bill. We keep hearing from point-of-care managers and leaders that they're so busy firefighting it's difficult or impossible to change their daily habits. Any recommendations about how to address this? Okay, so there's a mega question and a very important kind of micro-level question. I think David is right. I think most schools do not teach us how to learn. We don't learn how to learn, and in fact, with my colleague Guy Claxton, that's in a sense been our life's work, and Guy's work is quite extensively used in New Zealand. Now based in Melbourne, John Hattie, Professor John Hattie, has probably done more than anybody I can think of to bring alive the processes, the metacognitive processes of learning in a way that doesn't become undigestible. So, for example, you know, breaking it down to how do we give and receive feedback? How do we set goals? By the way, I'm moving on to the answer to the second question, to which the answer is make it really simple. That's how we do that. But I think David is so right. The question about how we kind of
make small tests of change in practice is actually not as tricky as it sounds, and I think it is by working at the team level as a starting point, by finding a commonly agreed simple thing that everybody can have a go at, and setting a relatively short-term goal for focusing on that thing, and being kind to each other and talking out loud as you're doing it, and having some, well, we know this, don't we, there must always be some means of measurement, so some simple metrics that do not necessarily have to be a full run chart, heaven forfend, but some simple way of just checking in with how we're doing with. And I think sometimes the apparatus of QI, so important when we're dealing with complex matters, can be overcomplicated in the team dynamics. So I would, from the grandiose theory of learning, and in the States, by the way, I think John Bransford's done wonderful work, as has David Perkins at Harvard, or the team at Project Zero at Harvard. And if you want to afterwards Google Center for Real World Learning, you'll see it's pretty much our life's work too. So think big and keep it simple.
Thanks, Bill. And I guess building on the second of those two questions, Eve Brooke, who's an ambulance technician at the Scottish Ambulance Service, was asking whose habits are most important to change first to drive change? Ground level staff or leaders and managers? Can it happen at the same time? Can it happen without top-down change? Can ground level habits really change?
That is such a good question. Habits are so closely allied to organisational culture, as I think Eve is implying. I'll give you my ideal world answer, Eve, and then you can interpret as you think best. I think we need, in an organisation, we need multi-level attention to these matters. So we need leaders, those in the middle of the organisation, and all those at the front line to acquire and develop and recognise the need for developing and changing their habits. By the way, I think individual professionals are key leaders, and I get very grumpy when we can only see organisations in hierarchies. But you are right, the implication of your question is that there are such things, and there are. I think it is possible, you asked this question, it's possible to create a local ecosystem. I can think of many teams that I have the privilege of working with who manage to do this stuff despite the culture, not because of it. But I don't think they enjoy that, and it has a human cost. So the official answer is that it needs to happen at all levels, and the official pragmatic answer is that there needs to be an organisation-wide debate. You can't tell someone to change their habits. Well, you can, but as I suggested earlier on, it may not work. You can measure it, and the kind of crude measures, all important kind of audit measures are in place, but that's more the kind of stick than it is the carrot. Ultimately, if we create an ethic of learning, then people do this because they recognise it's the thing that's going to make them feel better about providing or co-providing health and social care services. And so I think it really requires us to have an organisational debate. And the organisations that do this stuff best tend to start not from a gap analysis mindset, but from, which would be a Kurt Lewin kind of metric, if you like, but would, who I like in many, many ways, but would start from a David Cooper-Ritter perspective, would use appreciative inquiry or positive deviance. So their question would be something like, who's doing this best in the organisation? And I think if you use that frame, it sometimes is a lot easier to be seniority neutral. And by the way, there's one other thing here. I think it doesn't just have to go top down and down up. It also needs to go across. So there's a kind of vertical axis and a horizontal axis. So what it looks like to be in one tribe in a hospital, just to take an obvious example, where we have so many people contributing to the quality of healthcare, it will look very different in the different environments that doctors and nurses and anaesthetists and all the rest create. So great question and rather long-winded answer, and I'm aware that I'm imagining a perfect world which doesn't exist.
Well, actually, Eve has already come back on the chat box to say she really loves the multi-level attention that you're suggesting, but she's making a statement that she does believe that ground-level habit can slowly but surely radiate improvement. And
I agree with her. I completely agree.
She loves the term seniority neutral. Now let's jump across. We've got time for probably one more question. Just jump across to Canada, to Noura Hassan, who's an obstetric and gynecologist specialist in the Jewish General Hospital in Montreal. And Noura is asking, how do you incorporate the behavioural science aspects of healthcare delivery into clinical QI initiatives? Is it realistic to do it through restructuring and adding nudges into clinical practice, or can financial incentives help?
Financial incentives can help. I personally would start with an audit of within current curricula, which tend to be framed in terms of knowledge and skill, looking at which habits seem to be implicit in those, and map that. If you're interested, Noura, if you download the Health Foundation booklet, you'll see that we have a first stab, or I should say that my colleague and friend Paul Batalden has a first stab with our help in trying to map across between dispositions and habits and the knowledge and skills that typically sit in curricula and in the qualification and pre-qualification routines of most professions. So one mechanism is mapping, and then it can be nudges, it can be shifts. Some people prefer to make a radical shift and kind of revise the whole thing. Others find that painful and would prefer to start with maybe a particular module or a particular group, which they find some willing early adopters. I don't think there's one size fits all here. I think it's really a case of going with the grain of the culture in which you find yourself. And if it's a heavily incentive-driven culture, go for that. If it's a more consensual one, which I think actually most workplaces are, then probably find ways of accelerating the infiltration of this kind of thinking.
Bill, thanks very much. Now, we've run out of time this afternoon, folks, but just some comments in the chat box. Thanks very much to Amir, as is Ayan from the Health Quality Council in Saskatchewan as well, for commenting very positively throughout. As did Neil Rasher, who's a Senior Programme Manager at the Cumbria Partnership NHS Foundation Trust, who was very positive around the practical application of simple methods such as PDSAs, and he was also very positive about the comments you're making around the importance of context, Bill. Bill, we've had comments from all over the globe on the chat box. It's a great privilege to have had you on QI Connect. Thanks again to you too, Simon, for supporting us today and for asking the first question. Just as we close today and come to the top of the hour, a big shout out. Jennifer Graham has for many years now tried to get QI Connect to go interplanetary. So we're on our way. We've got Dr. Tom Marshburn, who is a qualified doctor who went into aeronautics and became an astronaut. And we'll hear about Tom and his view of space and what we're learning from space travel on the 26th of October. And just a reminder of the wonderful back catalogue of this year. We've just heard from Bill, and we'll put that on the website. You'll hear from Tom. And we're absolutely delighted to be finishing the year off with Sally Magnuson talking about the impact of dementia and cognitive impairment, her mother's story, and the importance of music. We'll hear from Sally in November. Remember to follow us on Twitter at HISQI Connect. Big thank you again to Bill and to Simon and to everyone on QI Connect today. Thank you and have a great day wherever you are.